Okay, welcome everyone. I'm just going to confirm that we're working on all of our platforms because I'm still getting used to this, but my name is Daniel Burke. I'm with the LaRouche organization, and you're in the right place if you're here for the LaRouche Libertarian Communist Economics discussion. So give me a moment.
Okay, welcome everyone.
Oh,
I'm just going to confirm that.
yeah, that's a rookie mistake, right? Anyway, so YouTube is definitely working, and it's rather loud. And let's see about Facebook. Facebook is working. Okay. All right, so I think we're okay. I'm just going to confirm everything one more time. And then I will get started by introducing the event. But thank you guys so much for joining us. Everyone from the lefty liberals and love lefties and liberals signal group organized by Dr. Irene Mavrakakis. Very glad that you guys are there. Let me just confirm. Yeah, there we go. Okay, looks good. Okay, now I see everyone in the chat. Fantastic. All right, I feel pretty good. Oh, look at that, Diane Sayre. Oh my goodness. Tyler, InfraWiki, please, as my friend InfraWiki says, like the stream and share it. Share it on Twitter. Let people know that we are live and help us get this out there. Okay? So now I'm just going to confirm because we were having some audio problems with Mike Termott. So hold on, we're going to check and see if we can hear him. Mike, are you there? Oh, we're still having difficulties there. So definitely reload the browser and then the browser window, and then let's see if we can fix that. Okay, and he's coming back in. That's probably going to fix it. So, all right, now we can get started. It is now 9:02. We have plenty of time, and I'm just going to give a very brief introduction just to tell people how this event came into being. I mean, this group chat of people who've been talking are all people who were supporters of, and many of them very much involved in, the Rage Against the War Machine rally in Washington, D.C. on February 19th, where you had this remarkable thing that people from all across the United States came together from many, many, many different political viewpoints and said we must work together to prevent nuclear war, to identify Joe Biden as the Nord Stream bomber, as that wonderful sign, that big yellow sign said that everyone saw at that event, to try to intervene at this moment in history as American citizens, but as world citizens as well, to prevent something that would mean the extinction of humanity in all likelihood, namely nuclear war. And among this grouping of people, I've just been really extremely happy to meet the people that I've met through that process and to see the growing potential, which is so urgent because this crisis, this strategic crisis, is getting worse and not better in a certain important way, and especially in terms of the economy in the United States and in what you might say, what might call the transatlantic system. So we're getting together from the idea that we could have common principles on what to do about the economic crisis. And that requires that we actually present our ideas to each other and hash them out a little bit and talk to some people who are trying to figure these things out. And that's the goal of tonight. And I really hope that this will continue and grow, because just like the existential military crisis demands our contributions as human beings, so too does what I think would be perhaps, and we'll see what other people believe in this discussion, the underlying cause of that military crisis, of that danger of thermonuclear war. That underlying cause also requires us all to stand up and to do something that will work. So That's what I have to share tonight in terms of the purpose of this event. And now I'm going to give a little bit on the structure. But before I do, let's go back to Mike and let's see if we can get his audio working. Mike, are you there? This is a bit of a problem. We still can't hear you. Jorge or Irene, I'm sure Irene is watching this. You may want to call him and see if you can help him out with any tech support. And we'll make sure that he has a chance to present in full. So onto the idea of the structure. And let me make sure I'm keeping track of things. All right. Oh, I see what we have to do. We have to clean out some of these nincompoops. Okay. Oh, yeah, we need some mods. Who can I make a mod? I'll make, I know you. I'm going to make, Lori, I'm going to make you a mod if I can. Oh, thank you, Sam. I will make you a mod. Yeah, we've got some losers in here. I think this is a good use of their time. Oh, great. Okay, InfoWiki, I'm going to give you a mod. Oh, and the great mod of all, Anastasia, is here. So everything is going to be fine. Okay, so let me go on to the discussion of the structure, and then we'll get right into it. Thank you all for your patience. So number one, we're going to have 15 minutes for each team, where we have, we're going to go today in an order. We're going to hear from the LaRouche organization first. We're going to hear from the Libertarian representatives second. We're going to hear from the Communist representatives third. And that will be, and I'm going to introduce them in just a moment. So we're going to hear from each of the three groups for 15 minutes, and this is their opportunity to answer the question, what would a competent US president do tomorrow? So however they choose to answer that question. After that round, we're going to go back to the same order, because we didn't want there to be like the first and last word given to the same organization or same group. And the first person who's going to speak, the first thing that's going to happen is that each team will receive 5 minutes to sort of respond. And they're welcome to say whatever they like. You can just expand on your previous comments. You can respond to what the other people had to say. But naturally, this is a dialogue, and so we're looking for some conversation. And once we've gone through that, and I'll be a pretty strict timekeeper, that's my goal, then we will be going to audience questions. And so I'll be looking at the Facebook chat, I'll be looking at the YouTube chat, and we'll give people an opportunity to comment to each other, or to respond to the questions of the audience. So that is going to be the structure. And if there are any questions, people can pose them to me. And this is still a relatively informal event, but the structure, I hope, will really help us. So now I'm going to introduce you to all of the individuals. I'll tell you their names. And then when I come to them as they begin to give their opening presentation, I'll give a little bit more information about them. So from the LaRouche organization, we'll have its president, our esteemed president, my friend Chris Sayre, who is, you'll recognize his, you'll recognize him from various things, including if you've been watching this channel. And then we'll have Kay Levinson, who is in Pennsylvania. Chris is in North Jersey. From our libertarian friends, we're really hoping we can resolve this technical issue. I'm sure we can. Oh, look, I see, Mike, your video for the first time. That's fantastic. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to take a moment and check Mike's audio. Hi, Mike.
Hi, can you hear me?
It's perfect. Thank you.
That's too bad. Just in case I say something that irritates you, I'll apologize for all this.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to you soon. So we'll have from from our libertarian friends, we have Jorge Basada, and he's with Liberty Speaks, co-founder. Really happy to have him. And who you just saw on video there, and you'll get to see him again, is Mike Dermott, who is an economist, and he is a presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about him later. And then from our communist representatives, we're going to have Caleb Maupin of Center for Political Innovation. And we will have also Sam Bismuth of Center for Political Innovation. And I just recently was very happy to spend time at their event in Washington, D.C., opposing the Summit of Democracy of the U.S. government. Anyway, so that's the story. And I'm going to give anyone an opportunity to stop me if they think I need to do something else. But without too much further ado, I will give you a little bit more information about Chris and Cade as I bring them up on screen. Hi, Chris. Hi, Cade.
Hello.
Hey, Daniel.
Hi. So for our viewers, and I think let's just see what's going on here. We've got some folks on. We've got some good friends in the chat in YouTube. Make sure that you like. We have 65 people watching. We only have 33 likes. Come on, guys. Get the likes up, share it around, let people know what we're doing. And then we've also got a number of people watching on Facebook. And so I'm just going to make sure I have that so I can monitor those comments. Thank you for bearing with me. Here we go. Yeah, so we've got about 60 people watching us on Facebook. So a nice little crowd of people. Thank you, everyone. So Christopher Sayre, I've known him for a long time, and I'm really glad that you're here, Chris. You can read Chris's work in Executive Intelligence Review, where he's published a number of really interesting, very well-researched articles on a range of topics. And if you get, and I don't have a copy in front of me to show people, but if you get the LaRouche Organization pamphlet, which is called The U.S. Economic Miracle on the New Silk Road, and you can find the digital version easily on our website, then you will find an opening article by Chris Sayre on, oh, there we go.
You might be able to find it here.
On the American system.
There we go. That's it.
And fantastic. And
not just by me. There was a lot of help by Rich Freeman and a number of others, particularly Rich Freeman.
Fantastic. And then we have Cade Levinson, who is in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and you may know him from his remarkable proposals for a special economic zone for Scranton and the future there. Hi, Cade.
Hello. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Okay. So those are the introductions, and now it's 9:14. I'm going to start my clock. And as soon as I stop talking, I'm going to give it over to you guys, however you'd like to proceed. Oh, one question which we didn't discuss. Do you have slides? No. Good. Perfect. That makes it easier for me. All right. So let me, I'm going to move myself away and give you guys the floor. Thank you very much. Go right ahead. Oops, that's the wrong one.
Okay, great. Well, I'll start with a discussion of what we think a president should do immediately, given the crisis of the situation. And of course, the crisis is by and large created by this president and other neocon presidents that we've had in the past 25 years. So this would be a dramatic change that we're calling for, because what LaRouche understood uniquely was the relationship between economic collapse and war. And this economic collapse is being created by a cannibalistic economic system that actually destroys the productive in order to make monetary gain, and intends to do that to the entire planet. And the good news is that there are many nations now, Russia, China, the BRICS nations in general, and other nations that are joining with that, that are saying, that's over. We're not going to let you destroy us. We're not going to let you cannibalize us to feed your bubble for another minute longer. So the United States has the opportunity to join in with that new BRICS model. And the point is that if you look at the American system of political economy, from Ben Franklin and Alexander Hamilton to John Quincy Adams to Abraham Lincoln to Franklin Roosevelt to John F. Kennedy, this is actually a very in the best sense of the word, the real America, a very American movement and development in the world that ironically China is leading, and Russia. And in fact, the United States, Russia, and China have been friends for a long time, since the beginning of the founding of the United States. And that's a longer discussion, and we're doing a lot of work on that. But so what I want to just briefly go through is what LaRouche proposed. One of the last things that he wrote was what is known as LaRouche's 4 laws. And so I will go through those briefly and then hand it over to Cade. So number 1 of the 4 laws, which in one sense is simply to stop the hemorrhaging of this bankrupt financial system. Number 1, the immediate reenactment of Franklin Roosevelt's Glass-Steagall banking law of 1933. As LaRouche said, without modification, and that this is a principle of action. In other words, what Glass-Steagall did simply was put a wall between investment banking and commercial banking. And it said that commercial banks that take deposits can only use those deposits for normal lending practices. Farms, factories, machine tool shops, mortgages, productive economy, investment in productive economy. The investment banks may be involved in various kinds of gambling activities, financial speculation of different types, but they would not be protected by the federal government. No FDIC money for those investment banks. And the big problem with the takedown of Glass-Steagall in 1999 by idiots in both parties, 90 idiots in the Senate to be precise, is that allowed the commercial banks to merge with investment banks and to gamble with people's deposits. So exactly what the problem was going on in the 1920s that the Glass-Steagall law dealt with. So 1, restore Glass-Steagall. Number 2, return to a system of top-down, thoroughly defined national banking. That is, Alexander Hamilton created our first national bank. The second national bank came 6 years later, and particularly under Nicholas Biddle, that bank was used to direct credit into massive infrastructure projects, canals, railroads, the infrastructure that's the grid, that's the guts of the physical economy of a nation that allows for all the private sector productive activities to thrive, because there's a basic functioning infrastructure grid of rail, of water projects, of electricity, etc. So, and number 3, creating a federal credit system that through that national bank, you're generating credit, sovereign credit that's issued for investment in high productivity trends in improvements of employment. As LaRouche says, with the accompanying intention to increase the physical economic productivity, physical economic productivity, not speculative activity, and thereby increase the standard of living of the persons and households of the United States. And the Hamilton understood this very, very well. In fact, in his paper on the subject of manufacturers, useful manufacturing, he has a quote in there where he says that one of the goals of this is to cherish and stimulate the activity of the human mind by multiplying the objects of enterprise. This is how the wealth of a nation may be promoted. So what you're talking about is, where does wealth actually come from? It comes from the education of the citizenry of a nation and from the creativity of the human mind. It does not come from the dirt. It does not come from gold. It doesn't come from raw materials. It comes from scientific and technological progress. And scientific and technological progress is a unique contribution that the creative human being offers. And that is what actually transforms the economy into a negative entropic or negentropic development. So the fourth law, the final law, is to adopt a fusion driver crash program. So he picked fusion because this is obviously the cutting edge of not only energy, but something that would transform the entire productive economy of the nation. It would completely transform every aspect of our manufacturing capability, of our infrastructure, and critically, it would increase our potential relative population density by leaps and bounds. And LaRouche really made a point about the potential relative population density as a yardstick, as a measure for economy. Is your economy creating the conditions through increased energy flux density? That is the amount of energy that you have going through the system. And the evil of the green policy is that it says we want to reduce energy flux density. We want to stop increases in energy production. Well, that will kill society. What LaRouche said is you've got to constantly increase energy flux density, constantly increase the negentropic nature of civilization and the economy, and that is done through the leaps and bounds of new scientific progress, going from, say, wood burning to coal burning to fission power, hydropower, fission power, to then fusion power, where you're increasing the amount of energy that you get from a smaller and smaller amount of stuff, of matter. So that's the goal of this kind of physical economy. And so that's what I would say. And just one other point that Helga Zepp-LaRouche, his wife, made in her recent paper on the 10 principles, is that we've got to create a just new world economic order so that this policy is not only the U.S. policy, the American president's policy, but that we reach out to the world to create a just economic order whereby we're fighting to lift up the living conditions of the entirety of mankind, of every sovereign nation on the planet. So that's what I would like to start with. And Cade, whatever you want to add.
Yeah, no, thank you for setting the table there for me completely. And I think I've got about 5 minutes or so I'll try and get right to the point of how I want to build off of what Chris was talking about. So what he went through with the 4 laws of Lyndon LaRouche there, what I mostly want to emphasize is the singular principle they come out of, which was referenced throughout Chris's presentation as well. This focus upon the betterment of the productive powers of labor to the betterment of the standard of living of the individual and their ability to contribute to that further development of society itself. And there is one aspect in particular of how these 4 laws could be implemented, I think, might form something of a basis of an ecumenical approach from these varying branches of economic thought that brought us to where we are right here in this discussion, with the use of China's special economic zones in the Belt and Road Initiative, especially in the last decade or so. They've become a real forefront of this international economic policy. And especially if you look at the sort of stereotype of these zones from, you know, places like the Financial Times or elsewhere in Western financial press, you get this weird mix of like, oh, it's authoritarian communist China is setting up these, you know, radical libertarian free market zones. And what they always neglect to mention is that these areas are set up across the board to the extraordinary benefit of the physical production of the area and the general welfare of the area. Recently, there's a recent interview with Tim Cook of Apple going around. Not the biggest fan of Tim Cook, but I think something he says here brings out the principle that's being ignored in this aspect of China's development, where he's asked about Apple's factories in China, and he talks about how it's not just going to the lowest cost of labor. That's not why they're in China now. There's cheaper places you could go just for labor, but they're in China now because of the skilled labor that's in China. Because when you get something together like this special economic zone, which is where you have a sort of a regulated somewhat, where there is put into place a specific zone that has certain tax regulations or deregulations, certain ways that it's set up to bring in foreign capital and also to build up domestic manufacturers from either foreign investment or from national credit, that it's the perfect condition that's focused on the development of these productive powers that allows for then a strong skilled labor to develop itself and to be there for an expanding field of employment, for an expanding standard of living. And if you compare that to these are certain things that have come from Diane's campaign going throughout New York, there's a couple plants where they're planning to make more technologically advanced high-speed train cars, where even if they have the funding for the plants and set them up, they're very concerned about the aging out of their skilled labor force. And I know I'm getting short on time here, so I don't want to ramble too much on this idea, but that if the United States tomorrow were to establish a national bank that could set up the credit that would provide the avenues of expansion upon something like these special economic zones, which we could build through a further integration into the global community by, you know, even something like joining BRICS or explicitly taking up Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's offer for the United States to join the Belt and Road Initiative and become part of this expanding network that uses these special economic zone centers that take from across the board of what you see as your general spectrum of economic thinking, where you do have something of top-down organizing of the situation, but it's with a explicit sort of use of lessening the tightness of control of that specific area in order for its industries to expand. That when your focus is upon what actually works and what gives out this betterment of the general welfare, that I think there are spaces like this where we can find certain ecumenical approaches, certain approaches that we can agree upon that to whatever degree both line up with preconceived thoughts, but even where it's outside of it a little bit by looking at the results, like something that's done in this example. You can find some common sense policy in a similar line economically as we see with the common sense in ending the war in Ukraine.
Thank you, Cade. Thank you, Chris. That wraps up your 15 minutes. We'll hear back from you in another minute, another little bit after the others get their say as well. Oops, there goes my timer. All right. Great. Talk to you soon. Okay, now I had a proposal from my friend Liam that I bring everyone up and somehow have you guys in the bottom. I don't know if this is going to work. Yeah, because it's, well, can I move? Can I move? Who gets? Oh, I can. No, can I? Yes, I can. Okay, so this is one way we could do it. This is probably better. Yeah, how's that? That way everyone can watch everyone and their reactions and when they grimace and when they smile. So, excuse me for this. I'm going to bring up Mike and introduce him, and then I'm going to bring up Jorge and introduce him. So, Mike Termott, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure. Jorge is going to go first between the two of us, but it's a great joy to be here and have my audio repaired.
Amen. Then I'm going to go ahead and just quickly introduce you to the audience by reading your some of your bio. So, Mike Termott is an Austrian school economist. He's a pro-reform police officer. He's a candidate for the Libertarian Party presidential nomination. In 2021 through 2022, he campaigned as the Libertarian Party candidate in the January special congressional election in Florida's District 20. Mike served as a police officer in Broward County from 2010 through 2021, including as field training officer for several years, all as a registered libertarian. And then, if I may, I'm going to leave it at that, Mike, and go on to Jorge. But there's much more to learn about Mike, which I invite you to visit his website and do so. And here we have Jorge Bezada. Very glad to have you here, Jorge.
Hi guys. Yeah, thanks for setting this up.
Yeah, let's do more of this. And if I may, I'll read briefly from your bio. Jorge Bezada has a degree in computer science and has been a software engineer at firms like Microsoft. He's published books on economics, and some of his economics writings can be found at the Ludwig von Mises Institute. His article, 2 Reasons Why Socialism Repeatedly Fails, is one of the most concise and widely read summaries of the Mises-Hayek explanation of the impossibility of socialist central planning. Jorge is also the co-founder of Liberty Speaks, a free market educational organization. So thank you so much for joining us, Jorge.
Thanks.
And please, may I start your timer?
Yep.
Okay, allow me to just get that up, and then please go right ahead.
All right, well, hi everyone. I will go first, and I will give a brief introduction to the Austrian School of Economics and some vital ideas that explain not only how the economy works, but how the whole world works. And these are the ideas of Karl Menger, Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, and so on. And after I give this introduction, then Mike will actually answer the real question of how we're going to get a president that can actually fix things. So if you look at the human body is a result of the actions of over 50 trillion human cells and systems like the respiratory system, the digestive system, the nervous system. But even though these systems are what coordinate the biological order, they were not designed by the cells themselves. Thanks to people like Charles Darwin and an understanding of natural selection, we have various hypotheses of how these systems inadvertently evolved without the thinking of the cells themselves. Now, something similar happens in the social order. Actually, we also know the mechanism that coordinates the knowledge that creates the biological order. We know that as genetics. A new gene, a mutation comes out, so that's new information. And then we have natural selection and competition selecting that better information if the animal is able to reproduce more and spread copies of the information. So that is how information coordinates the biological order. Now, the social order works very similarly. The mechanism that creates the information that coordinates the social order, or what the great 19th century British philosopher Herbert Spencer referred to as the social organism, is economic competition. Economic competition inadvertently turns the entire social order into a global supercomputer, where every company is motivated to innovate and to copy the innovations of others, thus inadvertently spreading superior information and subsequent social order. For example, let's say a Honda engineer in Tokyo came up with power door locks and power windows. It was the freedom of 8 billion human beings to trade their private property for what they calculate to be best, which is the Honda with the power windows, that motivated BMW in Germany, Chevy, and Ford in the US to copy the power door locks and power windows idea. Now, this wonderful mechanism of competitive knowledge discovery also shapes our morals. It is hardworking, courteous, tolerant people who treat everyone else with respect that, thanks to competition, inadvertently motivate everyone else to be likewise. There was a time when the United States welcomed everyone, on the Statue of Liberty from all parts of the world. Britons, Germans, Jews, people came with their own ethnocentric identities by working and interacting in the private sector. After a few generations, everybody wanted to be with a suit, treating everyone with respect, and so on. So economic competition also shapes our morals. Now, this wonderful mechanism of competitive knowledge discovery only works in the private sector. The government, being a coercive, competition-immune, monopolistic bureaucracy that gets the wealth that it needs through taxation, does not have to innovate or to copy the innovations from outside of its own bureaucracy. And this helps us understand why government just ends up consuming more than it produces, and it can really wreck civilization. Now, government regulations are information that are not subject to competition. The government says this is the way you're going to do things, and that's all there's to it. In the private sector, information is constantly arising and being adapted and compared to other information as expressed throughout the entire social order. But this does not happen with government regulations. This is why the medical sector in the United States, which is totally regulated and paralyzed by the AMA, FDA, and all these bureaucracies, that's why the sector has grown from consuming about 5% of the economy in 1960 to about 22% of the economy today, culminating in the massive COVID mania tyranny. Now compare the regulated healthcare sector to the IT sector. There is no American Association of Computer Programmers dictating what is the information that somebody must learn to be a computer programmer. Microsoft, Google, all of these big tech companies, they hire. I'm sure they have some teenagers in there, a bunch of people who do not even have degrees. So in the software sector, we can see how knowledge is constantly arising and moving at breakneck speed. And that happens because of the lack of regulation. And you just have pure competition spreading knowledge to society. Now, sorry about this. Now government plans, right? They require coercion. A government plan can only work if everyone is coerced into going along. This does not happen in the private sector. Notice how Google, BMW, Chevy, Audi, Toyota, Walmart, all of these companies, they have no armies. They hire and integrate people from all over the world, regardless of age, sex, race, and so on, while our governments are still just this monolithic carryovers from tribal identities. So that's something else to keep in mind. Now, I want to say something about money, okay? The production of wealth, okay, requires the consumption of wealth. If 2,000 men are going to spend 3 years building a skyscraper, they must consume food, energy, materials, and so on while they produce the skyscraper. Creating money by government central banks does not create such wealth, right? When the government creates money, all it does is that it allows the people who got the government money to consume wealth while leaving the rest of society with less wealth and more money, which means that there's a higher ratio of money per unit of wealth, thus higher prices. That's all that it does. We can see, for example, during COVID mania, right? Just from the months of, I think it was like May, June, July, August to maybe 2020, the US government created over $3 trillion so that people could stay at home and just consume wealth. So what is the result? A lot of inflation, a lot of higher prices, 20% increase in gasoline, real estate, and so on. So that's all that government creation of money does. And the next thing I want to say is just how horrendous war is, okay? During a war, human beings are consuming homes, food, energy, shelter. They're reducing the economic pie of useful things while they're building tanks, nukes, jets, and then using that to destroy the private property of other human beings. So even the countries that are winning a war, Okay, they are destroying their own economies. War is the worst thing that we could possibly do for society. And now, very quickly, just one more minute. Now, I can say a few things. Knowing that increases in private property lead to competition, and then competition is what spreads knowledge to society. So we can look back at history and we can see how civilization arose. For example, Martin Luther in the 1500s. At that time, the Catholic Church had a big course of monopoly on what people would do. You were born in a particular place and so on. So Martin Luther said, oh, you don't have to do what the Catholic Church says. You can just believe in God, the Bible, and so on. So that broke up the coercive power of the Catholic Church, increasing freedom. And then that freedom led to capitalism in Europe and competitive knowledge discovery. And that is what took the white man and Europeans to technological prominence. It is important to know that this change has nothing to do with race. Anybody who has private property and competition will gain the benefits of that. If Africa tomorrow had private property and low taxes and a private sector that is constantly innovating and spreading knowledge to society, they would be the powerhouse of the world. And okay, so I'll leave it at that. And now I will let Mike actually answer what we can do to fix the economy. We can't hear you, Mike. At least I can't.
Any nation that decides that it wants to deregulate, that wants to keep its money sound, that wants its government to back off and allow its economy to grow, those types of nations are going to dominate the rest of this century and into the next century. And indeed, objectively speaking, the reason the debate in any modern technical sense about how to make an economy run well is really over and behind us to no small extent is because we have observed over the last several decades that as nations' governments have backed off and allowed their economies to grow and develop, they have really exploded in terms of growth. That actually includes China and Russia, by the way. The reason that I'm in this conversation, by the way, is not because I used to be a police officer. I appreciate it very much, that mention. But the reason I'm here is because I spent more than a couple of decades as a professional economist. I taught economics at 3 different universities. I worked as an economist for the White House for a couple of years and for some international and government agencies as well. And I've been around the banking industry. And I know that what the president needs to do when he comes into office for the first time in the next cycle is to get a grip on the financial situation that faces our federal government, which is on a fast train to insolvency well before we get to the end of this century. So budgeting has to be something that is brought under control right away. The US government is far, far too large and growing too quickly. We need to spend less money. Obviously, the president also has to back off on military interventionism. I was pleased to hear the other fellas from the other group mention that war is a real problem. There's no question about that. And absolutely, the United States government has been a major contributor to that. I think it's absolutely misguided to think that Russia and China are going to lead in a different direction. But all these nations, including America, have to back off on the idea that war can solve problems. As an empirical matter, the United States population is ready for an anti-war message. There just are not examples in our recent history, some would argue even our long-term past history, of military interventionism on behalf of the American people that we would agree were a good idea. There just aren't those examples, and I think that the American population is ready for a fresh approach, which is to say, go back a century in terms of being open to the rest of the world, but closed to military style interventionism. So that's something that the president has to work on right away. And then, of course, as Jorge mentioned, we need to get our monetary policy under control. The Federal Reserve System is full of great people, smart people, well-intentioned people. I spent more than a decade working very closely with many of the economists in the Federal Reserve System, both as a banker and as an advocate for free market development in the United States. So I have every respect. But the unfortunate truth is, and this is not just in the United States, by the way, Our 100-year experiment in central banking has been an utter failure. It turns out that central banking is just, best efforts notwithstanding, incapable of solving or even damping the boom bust cycle. We need to get a much harder currency. We need to replace discretionary monetary policy in the hands of the Fed with a rules-based system. I'm not suggesting we have to go back to the gold standard, but we do have to get our currency to be much, much harder. I don't believe that the US dollar is in any threat of being replaced in the next couple of decades by any other currency out there, but I would love to see a robust competition to see which currency will be best over the next few decades. I think that competition has to include all other currencies in the world. I wish another government would back off its economy, firm up its currency, and give the US dollar a good run for its money. I don't see it happening, but I'm rooting for everybody to get in the game and try. I also think that that competition needs to include cryptocurrencies and anything else that's going to run on a blockchain in the future. It's one of the reasons why it's an additional reason why I believe that we need to get rid of the Federal Reserve System lock, stock, and barrel, because I'm afraid they're going to get into the blockchain cryptocurrency market and undermine a good, robust competition with the old-fashioned US dollar. I would make banking regulation, by the way, completely at the discretion of those who are regulated. There is absolutely no empirical evidence to suggest that banks can't make better decisions on their own about who their auditors should be, who their regulators should be. Banks in the United States, by the way, have quite a bit of latitude today over who would regulate them, but they need much more discretion to make those decisions than they do now. The other things that the president needs to get on top of right away are appointing officials in the cabinet who would oversee these cabinet level agencies in order to bring them under control, both in a spending sense and in a regulatory sense. We need to get rid of the vast majority of cabinet level agencies in the US federal government. And the only way to go about that is to first make them largely irrelevant. Anyone who spent as much time in Washington as I did, almost 20 years, that's weird. Anyone who spent that much time in Washington knows that to get rid of an organization, you first have to make it largely irrelevant. And so the object of the game would be to have appointees who shrunk down the footprint in regulatory sense and in a financial sense of everything ranging from the Department of Justice to transportation, energy, education, HHS, the whole ball of wax. And then the last thing I think that the president needs to do, which is much more complicated, is start decentralizing power out to the states. We need a president in the White House who understands that not only does the entire government need to be less powerful, but the federal government in particular needs to be less powerful relative to the states, and they need to be less powerful relative to communities. There's a big ball of wax there, but we can take it on piecemeal.
Thank you guys very, very much. Okay, I'm going to see if I can handle all of these transitions properly. There we go. Okay. Thank you both, Mike and Jorge. And now we're going to turn to our third team, and you'll have a chance, people who are watching, to hear from them. So I'm going to introduce Caleb Maupin. Caleb and I have known each other for a long time. He's a friend of mine, and his title is Ideological Leader of the Center for Political Innovation. And so he'll be speaking, I believe, next, and then Sam Bismuth will be joining later, also from the Center for Political Innovation. So Caleb, a lot of your friends are watching. Go right ahead, please, as soon as I figure this out. There we go. Okay, you're on. Oh, you're muted. Sorry. There we go. And I'm going to unmute you too, Sam.
Very good. Can you hear me? Can you
Yes,
hear
we
me
can.
now? All right, very good. Well, I first want to start out by giving greetings to Christians in the audience that are observing Good Friday. I want to give greetings to the Jews who just recently celebrated and observed the holiday of Passover. And I also want to give greetings to the Muslims in the audience who are today Day of Al-Quds, which is the last Friday of Ramadan, a day which since the 1979 Islamic Revolution of Iran has been marked by protests against Israel by Palestinians and their supporters. The Islamic Revolution of Iran made this call for the last Friday of Ramadan to be the Day of Al-Quds. So this is quite an important time for those of us of religious persuasion. So I want to offer greetings to all those different groups I listed. And I guess I want to start out by saying that I think it's fair to say that Sam and myself as communists, socialists, Marxists, in a way, we are libertarians because what we want is a world without coercion. What we want is a world without inequality, without social hierarchies. We want a world where people can just do what they want to do. Take what they feel they want, do what they feel like doing, from each according to their own ability, to each according to their needs. However, it is our understanding that the reason we don't have a world like that right now is because of scarcity, and that human beings have been constantly reinventing the way they interact with their environment. Human beings are the tool-making species. Frederick Engels, he said, the animal merely uses its environment and brings about changes in it simply by its presence. But man, by his changes, makes it serve his ends, and he masters it. And this is the final and essential distinction between man and other animals. And the entire history of the human species has been reinventing the nature in which we interact with our environment, in which we force the environment to serve us. Ants have been building their ant farms the same way for millions of years. Beavers have been building their beaver dams the same way for millions of years. But in just 5, 6, maybe 8,000 years, human beings have gone from hunter-gatherers living in caves to space travel and iPhones and artificial intelligence and all the amazing breakthroughs that humanity has achieved. And that is because humanity is constantly looking to reach a higher plane, constantly looking to advance the productive forces. And it's the Marxist understanding that history marches forward like a train. First, you had the hunter-gatherer civilizations. They gave birth to the slave empires, Egypt, Greece, and Rome. Out of that, you got the feudalism of old Europe. And out of feudalism, we had capitalism. And capitalism was a great advance over all the systems that came before it. But capitalism has some flaws. And the problem with capitalism is that it holds back human productivity. The problem with capitalism is that it creates a problem that had never before existed. In all other previous civilizations, when people were hungry, it was because there wasn't enough food. In all other previous civilizations, if people were homeless, it was because there wasn't enough housing. But it's only under capitalism that people can be hungry because there is too much food. That people can be homeless because there is too much housing. Capitalism is a system where poverty can be created by abundance. And it has a frequent problem with what you call overproduction, which is that the capitalist is constantly trying to churn out as many goods as he possibly can, but he also wants to pay the worker as little as possible for creating those goods. And the worker never has enough to buy back the product that he produces. The wages paid out to the worker are never enough to purchase the product that he creates. And this is the basis of the boom-bust cycle. John Maynard Keynes called this underconsumption. Marx called it overproduction. The term economists generally use for it is glut, G-L-U-T, glut. But there's a reason that the US government purchases billions of pounds worth of cheese and buries them in a cave in Missouri. You can look it up. There's a reason that we have a military industrial complex in this country and that the government spends billions and billions of dollars on bombs and tanks and weapons. It's to deal with this constant problem of overproduction. However, when you have a big technological leap, this compounds the problem of overproduction. And if you look at the great economic crisis of the 1930s, the Great Depression, it came after great technological leaps that came from the Henry Ford and his innovations in assembly line production. If you look at World War I, and the economic crises and the panics that preceded it, it came after great technological leaps. And when you have a great technological leap under capitalism, which is what the computer revolution really is a great technological leap like we've never seen before, the result is a long-term economic crisis because the worker is displaced from production, the ability of the worker to buy back the products he produces decreases, the rate of profit that the capitalist makes on the products decreases. This is called the tendency of the falling rate of profit, and that you have a problem. And Marxism argues that the solution is to abolish this problem of technological progress being an impediment to social progress, get over this situation where self-driving cars would be a disaster. Even though they're a great technological leap, they'd be a disaster because they lead to millions of people unemployed. Get rid of that situation and instead have a society where the banks and the factories and the major industries and the centers of economic power are operated rationally according to a central plan rather than to the chaos of the market. And so, with the guidance of a central plan, you can increase growth overall, and we can march toward that ultimate goal of a stateless, classless world of vast abundance. That's the idea. And the biggest lie that has been perpetuated, and I've heard it my whole life, it's been pumped into my head, communism never worked anywhere. It never succeeded. It's never had any success. Who were the first people in outer space? How was it that the Soviet Union and the surrounding countries went from being impoverished agrarian societies to being an industrial superpower? How was it that that the Soviet Union was able to have the biggest steel industry of any country in the world's biggest hydroelectrical power plants? How is it that China, with its state-run banks and its state-run industries, has raised more people out of poverty than any other country in the world? When Libya had a state-run socialist economy under the leadership of Gaddafi, they built the world's largest irrigation system. They had the highest life expectancy on the African continent. Now that Libya has been bombed into the free market, free trade, globalist Western system, they've been bombed into it and forced to join it with NATO bombs. Things there are so bad that people are fleeing and drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get out. And that socialism has proved that it's very good at raising people out of poverty, very good at wiping out illiteracy, very good at creating healthcare systems, very good at building up industries, building power plants, etc. However, there was obviously a difficulty. And we know the Soviet Union's not coming back anytime soon. But the reason for that is that the Soviet Union could not adjust. The Soviet Union needed to adjust in the 1980s, but they couldn't. However, China did. And China adjusted their socialism to include a market sector. The government shouldn't be making children's toys. The government shouldn't be running hotels and restaurants. When it comes to consumer goods, these things are best, left to the market. However, the market should not have control. You need the state controlling the banking system. You need the state controlling the major centers of economic power and making sure that growth continues. You need an overall central plan, but then there's room for a market within that central plan. And if you look at the countries around the world today that are successful with 21st century socialism, you look at China, for example, you look at Nicaragua, where their micro-entrepreneurship program has been astoundingly successful compared to the free market countries nearby like Honduras and Guatemala. You look at Vietnam, whose economic miracle has been widely praised, their micro-entrepreneurship program. The success of 21st century socialism is using the market to complement an overall state central plan to raise up productivity. 21st century socialism, learning from the errors of the Soviet Union, learning from the successes of China and Vietnam and other countries that have transitioned to 21st century socialism and raised people out of poverty. That is what we would advocate for the United States. And in terms of the United States, we would put forward 4 steps that could be taken to dramatically save the United States from the current economic crisis. The first one would be a mass mobilization to rebuild the country. It would be something like Roosevelt's Works Progress Administration on steroids. hire the unemployed young people or the young people that are stuck in short-term service sector jobs and have them start building high-speed railway, have them start building new fusion power plants and nuclear energy facilities across the country, have them start repaving the roads and the highways and the bridges, build new universities and new schools, give America a makeover, mobilize the population to do what the market has failed to do, and rebuild the United States of America with a popular mass mobilization like Roosevelt did during the Great Depression. Step two would be to put public ownership in control of our natural resources, the oil and the natural gas and the coal and the timber, the fruits of the land of America should be the property of all Americans, not the property of Wall Street bankers who have a slip of paper that says they own it. America's oil, America's natural gas, America's coal, America's timber should be utilized to make America a wealthier country. And the third step that I always point to, I always tell people that maybe Karl Marx is a bit too radical for you. So maybe you should read the Bible or the Quran or the Torah, because every major religion forbids the lending of money at interest. And the reason for that is because it leads to a creditor class, a group of people who make money by having money. And pretty soon they become exponentially wealthier than everyone else. Pretty soon governments are in debt to them and society revolves around them. And we would be for the abolition of private banking, but instead putting the lending of money in the hands of a real state central bank that would lend it strategically in order to stimulate economic growth and get the country going again. Have community banks on a local level, a state level, and a federal level, lending money not based on what the investors think they can make a profit on, but rather in what is in the economic interest of the country. Loan people money to start new high-tech companies. Loan people money to build new homes in their communities. Strategically use the lending of money to benefit the country economically. And that would be our third step. And our fourth step would be the enactment of an economic bill of rights, like Roosevelt proposed in his final State of the Union address. The right to a job, the right to housing, the right to education. And I will say that I disagree with how the Bernie Sanders movement and the so-called Democratic Socialist current, that sounds nothing like me, that speaks in the name of socialism. I would disagree with the way they speak about these things. Because when we provide someone with an education, it's not a handout. It's not like a gift, like, oh, we're just going to give you something. Rather, the idea is that if we want to have a strong country, we want to have a well-educated country, we need to start churning out the great engineers and the great scientists of the world like we once did. Furthermore, when we employ people, it's not like a gift. We're not giving them a job. The idea is that the productive labor of every person should be utilized to build a stronger country. And that when we have people who are unemployed, we should hire them to start doing useful work to build up the country. That essentially the invisible hand and the chaos of the market has left America out to dry. Since the 1970s and 80s, we've been gripped by libertarian free market economics. We have schools for profit, right? It's always better when a private company does it. We have private military contractors, right? What could possibly go wrong with that? Hiring private companies to fight wars for us, right? It's always better if the market sector does it. Prisons for profit. What could go wrong, right? Companies getting paid to lock people up, right? It's always better to privatize things. America, since the Cold War, has been infested with this belief that we put the individual above all else, that there is no community interest or self-interest, but rather that the people of the country, should all just scramble and work in their own economic interest, whether it's Friedrich Nietzsche, Leo Strauss, or Ayn Rand, this philosophy that says there is no real truth, there's only naked self-interest and greed, and that it's every man for himself. This is leading to the United States coming apart. However, if you look at what's going on other corners of the planet, if you look at what's happened with the One Belt, One Road initiative, where China goes into countries and builds high-speed railway, builds new universities, builds new schools and hospitals, if you look at what Russia has done with the Eurasian Economic Union, if you look at what is happening in the Bolivarian countries of Latin America, where illiteracy has been wiped out and healthcare has been provided and the life expectancy has increased and living standards have gone up, there is an alternative, and it's not the socialism of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union's not coming back, but Marxism, Leninism is a big influence on it. as is the Ba'athist Arab socialism, as is Bolivarian socialism, as is Deng Xiaoping theory and socialism with Chinese characteristics. And the main thing we need to do right now is we need to understand that the richest of the rich, the people running the United States, they are obsessed with degrowth. They want to drive down living standards, reduce the population in the hopes of saving their system. However, humanity is a species that wants to advance, that wants to march toward a higher plane. And that is what the low-level capitalists of the United States want. They want growth. They want productivity. They want more wealth. Meanwhile, that's also what Russia and China and Venezuela want. That's what Africa wants. That's what Latin America wants. The human race wants to keep marching forward. Well, it can't do that with the anarchy of production, and it certainly can't do that with the cynical, evil Malthusian green agenda being put forward by the Joe Biden administration and the war lobby. And so we need to construct some kind of united front to start marching ahead and break humanity out of the artificial restraints imposed on it by the greed of the rich. We need to move toward a rationally planned economy. And I think this conversation and the Rage Against the War Machine Coalition is a great step toward doing so.
Thank you very much, Caleb. Okay, now let's see if I put myself up here. All right, now we got everyone up here. We heard our opening statements. I understand that we'll hear from Sam during the 5-minute response period. And let's see, does this possibly work? Not really. I guess I have to go to this. This might be the best option. Okay, and let me take that down. That's not me. So, thank you very much, everyone, for making your comments and sharing your viewpoints. And now we're going to, I hope everyone's ready for this. We're going to give you another 5 minutes. And so we're going to go in the same order that we did, because we realized that that would make sure that we don't have a bookend for the LaRouche organization. And I'll give you 5 minutes to respond, and we'll be pretty quick. You can respond to whatever you like. And then we're going to go straight to questions. So people who are in the chat, start thinking about the topics that you'd like them to respond to. And when we get to questions, I'm going to keep people's responses to 3 to 4 minutes. I'll give a hard deadline of a hard line of 4 minutes when we get to the questions after this response round. So thank you very much. And let me give Chris and Cade their opportunity to respond. And I think I'm going to go back to the 2-person on the screen for this stage. Here we go. Okay, so I'm about to turn it over to you guys, and let me just get my timer on. Okay, go right ahead. Enjoy. There.
All right, Kate, shall I go first? And I can't. You're muted. Okay, I can't hear.
Are we okay? For some reason, Kate, you look like you're. It looks like you're not muted here. Why don't you go?
Okay, now I'm on.
Yes,
Can
perfect.
you hear me now?
Okay, so starting over, go right ahead.
Okay. Well, I think that if you look at the founding of the Republic of the United States, it solved a lot of these questions, ideological questions, because a point that LaRouche made is that man in the image of God is not, mankind is not an animal. We're not animals. We're human beings, and it's that scientific and creative capability that human beings have, and primarily agapic love, which I think is missing in ideologies. That's the fundamental question, and that the United States, the preamble of the Constitution, of the concept of the general welfare in the Constitution, this was absolutely critical. So when you speak of the government This is as Lincoln said, it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. If it's not, it's our fault. We're a republic, and so the question of the government playing a role, there are certain things that only the government can do. And on the question of states' rights, I think the states have rights. They have everything that they have, all the rights to do what the federal government doesn't have the power to do in the Constitution. Hamilton solved this. He said, sure, you can have state banks. The fact that we have a national bank, that we had a national bank, did not preclude the states from having state banks. But there was a national bank to direct credit into the nation as a whole. The Transcontinental Railroad of Abraham Lincoln was a national project. The Tennessee Valley Authority was a national project. The Hoover Dam, the Grand Coulee Dam, the whole concept of this kind of lifting up the internal potential of the nation, that was a national project. And the government of the United States can be a very loving idea. I mean, it's a republic. It's our government. It's a representative government. We elect it. It's become a monstrosity at this point. There's no question about it. But I think, unfortunately, that's a reflection of the collapse of culture in the United States and a collapse of a mission of the nation. So I think that there's a reality which we're facing right now, which is that there is a global collapse of quadrillions of dollars of fictitious financial paper. And that financial paper cannot be saved by money printing. There's no way we can't print enough money to bail out a collapsing bubble of money. It's an absurd idea. Money, LaRouche used to say, money is an idiot. Credit is the essential thing. What is credit? It's the intention of the nation to build the things that will make the nation as a whole more wealthy. That is infrastructure, energy systems, etc. Credit for a private entrepreneur is also intention. If I go and borrow money and I want to set up a business and I buy the things that I need to be productive, to set up a machine shop, for example, and I buy those things and I invest in that, I'm going to be able to make a profit and pay back a reasonable interest rate, 1 or 2%. I think that there is such a thing as a reasonable amount of interest. If I borrow money and I go to a gambling casino and I blow it and I don't happen to win, well, then I didn't have the intention of doing something productive with that money. But the money is just a representation of intention. And that's what credit is. Credit is intention to build a nation. And if nations are working together, the idea that the United States is overproducing right now, we have an all-time high trade deficit, $954 billion, I think was the recent trade deficit. We don't produce anything in this country, except financial derivatives and Starbucks coffee. It's just disgusting. We don't produce in this country at all. So we've got to go back to production of physical wealth. We've got to use credit as a means for doing that. And we've got to convoke an emergency conference among nations to put this whole financial bubble through bankruptcy reorganization immediately, because this will be like a nuclear bomb going off as this system collapses. So we need sovereign nations coming together to create a just economic order of credit for the world land bridge, as the Chinese government is pushing right now. The United States has got to join with that, not fight it. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you. Okay, and now we're going to turn to our libertarian friends. So allow me to bring Mike and Jorge up on screen. And I will give you Your allotted 5 minutes. Please go right ahead.
All right, I'll go first. The whole idea that we have problems in this world that can be fixed with greater government control not only sends shivers down my spine, but absolutely runs in the face of all available empirical evidence that there's any reason at all to believe that any of that would work. It's a complete misreading of history to think that the Chinese government has contributed at all to lifting anyone out of poverty. Today, the Chinese gross product on a per capita basis would put the great bulk of the Chinese people under the poverty line in the United States. The only reason anybody is above what the US would consider a poverty level is because of market reforms made in that nation over the past 20 years. The idea that the Russians have done anything to lift their people out of poverty because of socialism, that's just, I'm sorry, empirically, objectively speaking, that just didn't happen. It's just not true. The truth is, the only reason that the Russian economy has made progress is because of market reform. The reason that the United States standard of living and per capita product is so much higher than those nations, and I don't mean like 20% higher, I mean 5, 6, 7 times higher. And by the way, that gap is not closing. That gap is getting bigger on a per capita basis. The reason for that is because our economy works much more efficiently and effectively. I'm sorry, but when someone mentioned that they believe in the same libertarian ideas that we do, that's simply not true either. You spoke of allowing people to do what they want to do and live the lives that they want to live. But then you spoke of taking away their property rights and their rights to make their own economic decisions and suggested that the government should plan them for us on a top-down basis. That's not libertarianism. That's the very definition of authoritarianism. Parenthetically, it's also the way to hold back the development of both of an economy and a culture. Yes, the reason the United States government has exploded in terms of size and scope is, at least in part, the result of a collapse of our culture of independent living. That's probably true, but that doesn't make it a good thing. That makes it something against which we need to double down and return the safeguards that our founders intended against our government becoming too big and too powerful. The other thing that was mentioned that I find really concerning, just on an empirical and objective basis, is this notion that there is some sense of overproduction in the United States. I'm sorry, that's just not factually correct. That's not a thing that happens. Yes, the United States produces a lot more than everybody else, but our market's clear. We need to push for free markets inside the United States and outside of the United States. And that includes the banking sector. The reason that we had such a big collapse in 2007, 2008 was because of too much government intervention through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, not too little. I'll wrap up, and I invite my partner Jorge to chime in for 1 minute, and then he'll answer the next question.
Okay, so I'll briefly, this anti-profit attitude, every living thing is in a constant cycle of production and consumption. We're always consuming. We have to eat food, energy, etc., and we also have to produce. What does a profit mean? A profit just means that you have produced more than what you have consumed. That's all it means. Profit just means that you have increased order, you have increased the economic pie. You and I and everyone here, we're all alive because the social order has become more profitable as time goes by. That is why we can have 8 billion human beings who have access to far more wealth than even kings had, 200 years ago. So again, this anti-profit stuff is anti-life, it's anti-order. Now, pay worker productivity, it is competition that forces private businesses to compete by paying a higher wage. Why is it that Microsoft and Google and all these tech companies, why do they have to pay their computer programmers $50, $60, $100 an hour? Why don't they just pay them $2 an hour? They have to compete against each other. The more wealth is produced, the more wealth has to be offered in exchange for labor because of competition. And are we done with our time?
Yes. I'm sorry. Anyway, thank you so much for your comments. Thank you very much for your participation as well. So I'm going to go on to the next. Thank you, Mike. And we're going to hear from, I'm going to bring up Caleb and Sam, but I believe we're going to hear from Sam. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, just Sam. Go ahead, Sam.
Okay, very good. Let me get your time going. Hold on. Okay, go right ahead.
All right. I've got a lot of notes here, so let me just get through them all. So first of all, I'm a firm believer that no matter how you enter reality, through whatever ideology, whatever study, as long as you have access to the truth, you will arrive at reality, right? And you can do this through Marx, through LaRouche, or through any other thinker who's comparing things to reality, right? If you take multiple photographs of the same object with the camera, it might look like a different object from a few different angles, but we can all agree that we're talking about the same object, right? And further, even if we disagree with this or that notion, we understand, right, that we don't have the power right here, right now, through any kind of agreement or debate to replace the current system with something else. So keep this in mind, right? Just keep this in mind, because it's very important for us to find points of agreement here more than anything, so that we can have a more effective movement rather than simply quarreling over ideological disagreements, which may simply be the result of different viewpoints. Though there are many things that I have to say here. Now, with LaRouche, I see massive parallels between your view and the CPI Marxist view. I don't really have anything to debate you guys on right now, at least. Maybe something will come up. So instead, I am going to speak to the libertarians. Now, I have many points of agreement with the libertarians, and these are very important points that we have united on and should unite on. War is awful. War is awful, right? We oppose war. And many states are despotic. We think that the US government, especially the empire, but the US government certainly needs to be scaled back in many areas, right? So, and we understand profit is good, actually. We don't believe profit's bad. We believe the way in which profit is secured under our current system is the problem, right? And Marx even supported profits compared to feudalism, right? He supported capitalism compared to feudalism because those markets were breaking things up and centralizing and changing things and bringing society closer to the future. And even under a total Soviet planned system, there were still markets and there was still simulation of markets to have competition, right? It was called Soviet emulation. So we understand profit is good, markets are useful, and competition is a great thing. And that's a common misconception. People think communists want to pay everyone the same wage. Complete nonsense. Now, here's where I'm going to get into our disagreements. The first thing is there is no such thing as a market without a state. You guys talk about all these markets, right? But these markets always exist in a particular real context, right? You can't think of a market as simply a system operating on its own, right? Markets exist in states, in systems, etc., based on concrete agreements, based on the power of real states, based on real agreements that occur. And there has never been a global free market system. And the people that claim that they created a global free market system, who were they? The British Empire, right? The US Empire now. These are the people claiming they have a free market system. And how do they create it? Through despotism, through militarism, all of these things, right? So let's say, okay, you want to have a global free market. You want to have the whole earth unified in its goals, where the most efficient place to develop a certain technology or whatever, right, in the world is going to do it. This sort of ideal. I think that is a great ideal, but the only problem with this ideal is that it cannot happen. The only possible way for that to be a rational ideal is to have one world government. And I don't believe in one world government. I don't think it's ever going to happen. So as long as we're dealing with the reality of individual states existing in their own interests, we are never going to have a global free market system, because any one of those states, Venezuela, Cuba, Russia, Korea, any one of these states could decide to nationalize their resources. And when they do it, that's going to give them certain advantages that make it so other countries are going to have to change their plans as well. It doesn't work. The only solution would be to overthrow their government, which is exactly what the US empire does. That's the open society. That's globalism. That's one world government. And I don't believe in that. So instead of simply purely protectionism or free marketism, we need to have a rational solution. Daniel, do I have more time or? No? Okay. I have a lot more to say, but we can.
I hope there will be more opportunity later in the program.
Okay.
When you're answering questions. Thank you very much for your comments, Sam. Okay. All right. That was exciting and fun, and I really enjoyed hearing from everyone. I mean that very sincerely. So I'm going to take a moment, because I've been not the perfect host, because I did not acknowledge the fact that 2 people put in some money. And that is a big help, and I thank you for it. So we had the Black Pack. He put in $10, and he has a rather provocative statement, which I'm going to read because I suppose that he's allowed that. If I can find it. Where did it go? Oh, gosh. I'm having a hard time finding it on my stream here. Oh, maybe it's going to turn up over here. Oh, I'm going to have to go back to it then. See, I'm really not a very good host. This is my first time ever having that kind of thing come through. But anyway, the Black Pack put in $10, much appreciated. And then we also had a contribution at the very beginning of the show by Jim Harwood. And that is fantastic. So thank you for your support, everyone. And then, secondly, I'm going to take 2 more minutes of your time, and I'm going to give you a word from your sponsor. And that is just today. I hope in the future that other organizations will sponsor these conversations. We'll host them. But that is today. Look at this. We got a conference coming up. See? At least I got this working, which is going to be April 15th and 16th. It's going to be an online conference, and you can register at theschillerinstitute.com. And we're going to be discussing, in particular, this concept of what it would take to have an international emergency conference to reorganize the financial system. And so I'm going to take the final section of the time that I'm desiring to take from you, and I'm going to show you. Let's see, where is it? Here it is. I'm going to show you this video, which I really hope will come through with audio. Let's see.
Ukraine, which in reality had already started in 2014, escalated with the Russian military operation. It is very clear that the real issue is not Ukraine. It is a proxy war between the United States, Great Britain, and NATO on the one side, and Russia on the other, with a conflict with China also looming. The real issue is that the nations of the global south are trying to shed the colonial order, this time for good, and they have now become the global majority. History calls upon you to overcome your ideologies. It demands a new era for peace and development. Without this, as the president of Belarus recently warned, through the efforts of the United States and its satellites, a full-scale war has been unleashed in a neighboring country to the last Ukrainian. World War III with nuclear fires is looming on the horizon. That's why you should intervene with the Schiller Institute April 15th and 16th at our international conference, to change the course of history for the better.
Okay, so that was a word from your sponsor.
Years ago, hundreds
hold
of vans
on.
crisscrossed the city, helping bridge the
Okay, yeah, and I know you couldn't quite hear everything perfectly, but you heard it through my microphone, I hope? Yeah, all right. Okay, so I'll get better at this. But thank you very much for giving me the chance to present those items. And indeed, I hope that you go to schillinstitute.com and you sign up. And also, my friend Dewey Donahue wants you to know that you should subscribe to our magazine, Executive Intelligence Review, at larouchepub.com. Okay, so that being stated, let's go to some questions. And I would urge everyone, tell us what you got. Come up with some really fantastic questions. I'm checking the chat in the Facebook, and I'm checking the chat in the YouTube. And let me find some. And we'll switch up the order that people have been able to speak in. We'll go to the libertarians first, and then we'll cycle through. So let's see. We have a few comments that I could read. How about here we go. Here's a couple questions. This is a question from Sam. Oh my goodness. There's a question I think is not one I'm going to read. Okay, I'm going to go ahead to this question since we have it, and it's pretty. Okay, it's a reasonable question. So the question is posed, how did Russia, I'm not exactly sure that I want to ask this one. There might be a better way of forming it, but I was hoping, there's some guy here, I'm going to kick this person. This person is a real jerk. Okay, there we go. And pardon me while I filter through this, still trying to figure out how people communicate. Okay, here we go. This is a well-phrased question from Tyler McConnell. Who created the present situation in America? Who created the present state of the United States? And what was the further point that he made? He asks, was it wealthy or working people? But go ahead and answer however you please.
Okay, so I'll answer this question. This mess that we find ourselves in was not created by a single individual. This is what you get from the economic ignorance of the masses. As long as the people believe that the experts in Washington, D.C. have to run society, as long as people believe that the Federal Reserve can just print up all this money to do whatever we want, as long as the people believe in central planning and all of this government stuff, we're going to find ourselves in this mess. This mess was not created by Apple and Microsoft and Walmart hiring people from all over the world, providing us, cheap products. So this was just made. There's really no one to blame. Like, I do not blame anyone. I mean, I look and I talk to my neighbors or people around me. If they believe that we must have a coercive bureaucracy run society, I mean, most people, if they do not understand freedom and free markets and how competition and freedom is what really creates a social order, they fall for these economic fallacies of just having the experts run everything. And I mean, that's why we got the Soviet Union. I mean, at some point, somebody packaged all these little fallacies in the Communist Manifesto, where it says, what is the communist idea? It's abolishment of private property, abolishment of the family. And these ideas made a lot of sense to a lot of people. A lot of people thought, oh yeah, look at capitalism, it's creating all this complexity. We need rational experts telling everybody else what to do. And they got rational experts telling everybody else what to do. The central plan of the experts can only work if everyone is coerced into going along. You cannot have a master plan work if suddenly somebody says, oh, no, I don't want to pay the taxes for it. I got a different idea. I want to do something else differently. So you have to coerce everyone. And when you coerce everyone and you stop competition and profit and loss calculation that keeps everyone producing and consuming less, making profit, then you just consume more than you produce, and you have famines and the destruction of civilization. And so, I mean, again, so who is responsible for this? No one is. The social order evolved on its own. And because we got more private property and few of us realized it, and we are destroying it with our reason. We need to understand all of these things. And I mentioned before how the complexity of the social order, once we got freedom and we got capitalism, the social order got very complex. And again, the fallacies just spread like wildfire. And we were lucky here that in the United States, we had a tradition, a more strong tradition of Christianity, of private property. You can't just have everybody, the government tell you what to do. And we were lucky. We had freedom. We didn't have scientists. We didn't have all these atheist scientists running the world. We have freedom. We had our Bibles, and we had the respect for private property. So just average people respecting private property, we totally crushed the Soviet Union in terms of productivity and everything. And the Chinese have learned. I mean, if you talk to Putin, Putin will be the first one to tell you that the communism of the government planning everything, that was a total disaster. Putin will tell you that. And I'm sure a lot of the Chinese leaders today will tell you the same thing. And that's why they have economic zones. What are these economic zones? They're just freedom. I mean, now the Chinese call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. That's because this massive bureaucracy can't just admit that they made a monumental error. Just say it. You made a mistake. There's nothing wrong with that. Lots of people with very good intentions sometimes fool themselves into making massive errors. I mean, I was born in Cuba. Am I going to say that my family, who were hardcore believers in communism, I got 3 uncles named after Lenin, okay? Am I going to say that they were evil or dumb? No. They just made a very understandable mistake. The social order is very complex. If you do not understand how profit and loss calculation and freedom and the competition of ideas is what really creates the social order, it makes sense that you're going to fall for this idea that you can just tell everybody else like what to do. And I'll briefly mention that just one of the comments, I know Caleb mentioned that we need to abolish technological progress, abolish self-driving cars. Okay, so there you go. So let's make it a criminal act to have self-driving cars. Let's make it a criminal act to innovate with technological progress. I mean, again, technological progress is what allows us to increase the amount of production relative to consumption. So we have more profit and more wealth and more life. I want to see more life, more people, more human beings. How do we discover the information needed to solve all of these environmental problems and all of these things? Through competition and freedom.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to take you guys off the screen. Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Jorge. And we're going to hear from our communist friends who can respond immediately. And I am keeping a 4-minute timer, as I said. So look out for that. And I've got 2 more questions already lined up, which I'll explain after we get through this round. I'm sorry. Here we go. Okay.
All right. I've got a couple things I want to say. The first thing is, I don't know if Jorge just wasn't listening to me when I spoke, but the entire thrust of what I was saying was that we need technological progress. I said that under this system, self-driving cars would lead to poverty because it would eliminate the job of drivers. And that's a flaw in capitalism, is that it's a technological advancement leading to a problem. To claim I don't believe in technological progress is just an utter distortion of my argument. I don't know if you're intentionally lying or you just weren't listening when I was talking, but regardless, one thing I do want to say, since we're on the topic of technological progress, is that, you talk about Apple and Microsoft, you talk about the computer revolution. That is very much the result of government interventions. It was Alan Turing's decoder machine, which was a government operation that was, during the Second World War, when the British economy was largely state-run, that gave birth to it. And the tech monopolies of today, Apple, Microsoft, IBM, and all of them, benefited very significantly from a huge government subsidy. The government very much worked hard to try and defeat the Soviet Union when it came to the computer revolution. And there was a huge amount of government involvement in making Silicon Valley the center of the global computer revolution. When it comes to Russia, you said that all of Russia's advancement is due to the free market. Well, after the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 90s, they tried radical free market policies in Russia. They sold off the country to the highest bidder. The Yeltsin administration went over there. Jeffrey Sachs, who's gotten much better in recent years, but was a radical libertarian free market economist then, facilitated the country destroying itself. And everyone knows that the reason Putin has been so successful is because he recentered Russia around 2 state-controlled energy companies, Gazprom and Rosneft, and that Putin facilitated, he put the government once again at the center of the economy and used the revenue from these 2 state-run energy companies to facilitate the rebooting of the economy. And I do want to add that, this is all, we can talk about history all day, but we're talking about how can we fix the country. That's what we're talking about. And when it comes to the United States, look, we've been trying libertarian stuff for years. Our infrastructure, our government roads, we're not spending money on them. They're falling apart, right? We don't need any government roads. Our power plants, we're not spending money on them. They're falling apart, right? Every other major major industrial country in the world has national health care. We have a private healthcare system that is an absolute disaster. Now, the state props it up, but it is a private market healthcare system. In addition to that, in the United States, people have been paying for their education. I mean, we have the most free market economy of any Western industrial society. So according to libertarian logic, we should have the most prosperous free society. We should just have the best economy. We don't have that. And to characterize China's economy as being a free market economy is utterly ridiculous. They have huge state-run banks. They have a 5-year economic plan, and even the private companies in China can't do what is in their basic market interest. The Communist Party or the leaders can come to them at any time and say, you do this or you do that, and they have to. So to characterize, and this always blows my mind, how is it that libertarians who think Obamacare is communism can look at China, state-run banks, 5-year economic plans, no market freedom even for private companies, and say, oh, it's free market. I mean, it blows my mind. And it's kind of like how someone can hear what I said. My whole presentation began with talking about technological progress and how much that's an essence of what I believe, and say, oh, he said he wants to abolish technological progress. That you're not listening to the words that we're saying. And that's my fear, is I want this to be a conversation about how we can make the country better, not an old debate about communism or capitalism, because if we just do that, that's an old debate that goes on forever and is not really productive. Go ahead, Sam, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I suppose if we have time, right?
Yeah, regrettably, we've reached our 4 minutes. Thank you, guys. Okay. And allow me to remind the participants here that we're seeking common principles, however you choose to pursue that. So let's maintain that orientation to whatever extent you think is appropriate. So anyway, let's move on and let's hear from Cade and from Chris responding to this question. And let me just get my timer properly set up, and you may proceed.
Chris, can I take 1 minute to respond to the sort of response to the question? Then if you feel comfortable answer the question itself about how we got here. All right. So just one thing with Jorge, what he brought up with the special economic zones. I think these are a great thing just to keep talking about between these three sectors. As far as we're talking about common principles, I think looking into the history and the effect of these zones in particular would really develop the conversation. But one thing I want to mention about them from both sides is, one, yes, they're sometimes referred to as free trade zones, and they do focus on, in certain aspects, deregulation to certain degrees regarding taxes, things of that nature. But they're always established within China and along the Belt and Road Initiative with the national policy in mind, and with the policy of the national credit directed by national banking in China. Like in my area, in Scranton, ever since like the late 80s, you kind of have these knockoffs of special economic zones. Like we have the Can-Do Center down in Hazleton, and even within the Scranton itself, it's like if you start a business, it can go 10 years without taxes. But it's not in any sort of directed way towards maximizing production. And so if someone comes in and starts up like an Andrew Tate like webcam enterprise, it's just as likely to qualify for this 10 years of no taxes as a steel manufacturer would be. But also in regards to banking, even in China, though they have the national banking, it's not a totally nationalized banking sector. They still have the China merchants banks for individual firms. So I think it's looking at this question, we can find some ecumenical points. But then, Chris, please take the rest of the time here.
Okay. Well, so the question how we got here. I mean, I think it's a longer historical discussion, but simply put, the United States lost its way and became the empire that we fought the revolution against. We have decided that the British are our best ally, and we have modeled our foreign policy, especially under the neocons, under the British Empire system. So what we have to do is go back to I think the thing that unites everybody here can be found in the American system of political economy. That what founded this nation, and that was, look, the Bill of Rights is clear. We have individual freedoms. We have, we don't need a government, as Matt Taibbi is exposing. We don't need a government which is spying on us, which is censoring us, where freedom of speech is being destroyed in front of our eyes, or censorship runs amok. But we do need a government to build railroads and to build to foster scientific progress, to have a fusion power program. I mean, the only, there was a Jason Ross did an interview with Paul Gallagher a while back on TLO, and there were major breakthroughs made in fusion. Unfortunately, this was only because it was done at, I think, Los Alamos under a military budget. Imagine if we were putting that money into the peaceful applications of fusion energy. I mean, what a waste of money that we're spending all of this money on weapons, as opposed to fusion, which would create energy for all of mankind, limitless energy, essentially. I mean, so I think the question is not big government or little government. The question is good government, proper government. What is the government for? It's for the general welfare of the nation. It's not to control people, but it's to do the things that we need government to do. And that's infrastructure, public works, things that make the private sector more productive.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so guess who we have? We have a special guest. It is no other than, I hope your video can work, Dr. Irene Mavrakakis, who is an advisor, I might say up front, to Mike Dermott in his capacity as a candidate for presidential office. Irene, can you open up your video? Maybe you have to go to settings and adjust the settings.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. So if the video doesn't work, then that is absolutely fine.
Well, let me try.
And Irene is the co-founder of Liberty Speaks, along with Jorge Posada. And she is the wonderful woman who is responsible for the Love, Lefty, and Liberty group DM. Oh, she's coming back in, which is probably the most appropriate thing. So I'm going to make sure we get a question from her. And then we're going to take a question from Jason Ross. And then we'll go to probably one more question, or maybe not. That might be all we can get to without going horridly late. But let's do our best to get in 3 questions. Here's Irene. So
hey.
Irene, hi.
How are you?
Very good. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to get off the screen and I'm going to allow you to pose your question to the teams. And then since we started with the libertarians last time, we'll start with the communists this time.
Sounds good. Well, thank you all to the speakers who agreed to do this. And of course, Daniel, you're a wonderful moderator. So my question is, could you guys each please speak to specific policy areas where you believe the most change is necessary?
What a lovely question. Thank you, Irene. Okay, so I'll take us both off screen and we'll go to our communist friends.
Okay, so yeah, Caleb said he'll let me handle this one. I'm sure he would do a wonderful job on it. Well, CPI has our 4-point program, but if I had to choose simply one area of policy to focus on for America, I would say foreign policy is extremely important, right? Because we need to navigate a global shift that is occurring. And even if you are a rah, 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 America first type person, you can see that objectively our empire is failing and burning itself out. So even if you are like Scott Ritter, where do you think this guy's coming from? Do you think he's a peace-loving hippie? Not at all, but he's on the same side as a lot of us here. Why is this? Right? Because we can see this very important global shift that we have to navigate. And so I would concern myself personally with scaling back the American empire without destroying the country. And believe me when I say, we might want to have more freedoms, economic freedoms in the future, all these things. These are great things. Being able to start your own business, all these things, wonderful. But the maximum way to reduce the damage of the collapse of America from scaling back the empire, it's going to require a little bit of that central planning. Now, I'm not saying we're going to steal your freaking toothbrush or something, right? I'm not even saying I'm going to be in power dictating the policy. I'm just saying that an ideal government handling this situation would certainly be viewing things similarly to how a Marxist or a follower of Lyndon LaRouche, for lack of a better term, would view it. Where at the very top, tippy top level, maybe not at the small level, like small businesses and small properties and all of this, but at the very top level of national central banking, there needs to be control. There needs to be a focus on national development and prosperity and technological advancement above everything in order to help our country survive this shift. Because without such a policy, free markets and the decline of an empire looks a lot worse than perestroika for us. It would be completely devastating. So personally, I would focus on that area, foreign policy and banking policy. I don't know, maybe that's a little too broad. Maybe there's proposals we could make, right, which would be good. But that is where I would focus. Caleb, do you have any comments? Do we have more time? All right, that's it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. And now again, I have to do my host duties and thank Charles Gracia for putting in a $50 donation through the YouTube. Thank you so much. That is a huge help, and it was wonderful to see you at Rage Against the War Machine. So I hope we get to talk again soon. But now let's go to the LaRouche organization and hear from them on a response to Irene's question. So I'm going to bring you guys both up, and I think I'll just make a habit of having both people up the whole time during the questions. Let me get my timer. And like Sam was concise, that was great. Go right ahead.
2 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
2 minutes. Okay. I think the fundamental change that we have to make is that it has to do with our view of mankind, that we are not animals. I think mankind has got to, we have to come to adulthood, and we have to view each other as precious human beings in the image of the Creator. And that means that our relations among nations is based on win-win cooperation, that we have to give up the idea of a zero-sum game, that if you prosper, that means that I am diminished, and vice versa, that in fact, because of the nature of the universe being not entropic, that your winning and my winning actually work together, and that nations need to cooperate on that basis. And that's what I think, that's what the LaRouche movement is proposing. That's what Helga Zepp-LaRouche is proposing in this conference coming up. It's going to be critical for that.
Yeah, and it's basically the same thing I'd say, but what's coming to mind to phrase it is that the United States needs to reestablish its credit in the full sense of the term. We need to be interacting with the global community, so in the first moral level, in such a way that we are reasonably seen as a reasonable actor, and we treat our allies like allies, and we allow the world to be allies with us, so that people who are at least would assume to be our closest partners won't expect their essential infrastructure to be blown up, like the Nord Stream pipeline. So that if we're involved with a coalition trying to negotiate like a peace deal like the Minsk Accords, we won't be involved with that coalition sabotaging them at the same time as the recent those Russian pranksters who had an interview with Francois Hollande further proved the point that the Minsk Accords by the West were mostly used in order to build up Ukraine's army and weren't really sincere at all. So on that moral level, we need to establish our credit. We also need to establish our credit in having sound fiscal policy, in dealing with our own production and how we involve ourselves with the development of the rest of the world and the redevelopment of ourselves in such a way that we're seen as a nation like China is now with the win-win Belt and Road policy, that we follow the Westphalian principle that the other's interest is our interest, that it is in our best interest for the rest of the world to be multiplying its development with our development as well. And going through, and the best way through that is aligned with the 4 laws that Chris mentioned at the beginning of our presentation.
Thank you both very much. Okay, and now I'm going to bring on our friends, our libertarian friends. But before that, let me briefly thank Lumpia Logic for putting in her contribution. And she has a question which I will make sure we get to, that she used her super chat to make sure it would be seen. And I think I will. But here we go to Mike and to Jorge. And let me get my timer. And then take it away.
Here? Am I going first here?
Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks. As far as what we should be focusing on, we do have significant problems in the United States. Yes, I was very heartened to hear the others talk about foreign policy. We are all Westphalians here, which of course is why we got to know each other in the first place. If anyone on our side accidentally said anything nice about the way the Chinese economy is run, that was a complete error and a miscommunication. The Chinese government is one that completely disregards human rights, is in that sense the epitome of libertarian corruption, just absolutely the opposite, and is the reason why that nation remains wallowed in poverty, and I believe will continue to be so for at least 2 generations. So apologies if we miscommunicated about that. The United States does need to pull back its imperialism. China and Russia as well. Make no mistake, those countries are just as aggressive as we are. It's no coincidence that the problems we have in the United States are those places where the government is most heavy-handed. We have a horrific primary and secondary education problem, and that's because in most places in the United States, they are run by monopolies, and those are controlled by government finance. We need a way for parents to choose whatever schools they want their children to go to, and for economic competition to take over and drive development in terms of education. We also need to get a hold of monetary policy, fiscal policy, as I mentioned. But as a police officer and as an economist, I got to say that we have a lot of problems on the community level, from things that the president of the United States would have a hard time getting to, except in a debate sense. And that is that we have a horrifically counterproductive war on drugs. We need to reform our criminal justice system. We need to end housing zoning policies that contribute to housing price spikes and difficulties and people finding affordable housing. We need the government out of heavy-handed control over communities. Jorge, you may want to add something here.
Sure. Well, I'll say that I stand in solidarity with my communist buddies in mentioning that the militarism is just horrendous. To me, that is the first thing that we need to cut back on. And the United States consumes over $1.2 trillion every year of wealth to sustain this militarism. That is as if all the wealth that Mexico produces, the world's 15th biggest economy, has to be consumed while we just create nukes, jets, all these things just to bomb every country that is critical of Israel. Okay, we have to fix that problem. I understand how Israel is surrounded by a lot of anti-Semites and people who say horrible things about Israel, but we have to fix the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That is from where all the naive good versus evil tribalizations grow. And we really have to fix that. It's a very difficult thing to fix, but we have to do it, because even when you look now, I mean, this war, you have, who is united? You have Russia, Syria, Iran, all of countries that are very critical of Israel. And that, that is why, the neocons, paint Putin as the next evil Hitler. Now, I think Putin made a mistake with this invasion, but we cannot get into good versus evil. We have to look at human beings as people who are dealing with complex situations, and we just gotta tone that down, but we have to solve that mess. So that is really like my main priority. And then obviously, the banking. If we didn't have the Federal Reserve printing all this money, we wouldn't have all of these problems. If we go back to, as Mike said, a harder currency where the bureaucrats can just print up all the money to do whatever they want, whether it's warmongering or it's just whatever, it would really put the brakes on this stuff. But definitely the warmongering. And one more statistic is that I think the top 10 companies in terms of R&D spending, like Toyota. Okay, yeah, I'll stop that. Thanks.
Oh. Okay, well, I thank you guys very much for your comments. And I'm going to take you guys off the screen. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Mike. And now I was looking, I had a comment from Jason Ross. He had a particular question about infrastructure development. And since we had Tyler McConnell as a CPI member, and we had Irene, who's libertarian, I thought we might hear from him. But now I'm having a hard time locating that. So let me just take one more moment and see if I can turn it up. And if not, I have a backup. Okay, I'm going to go to my backup question, which is from someone who's highly involved, quite related to the significant, as one of the speakers that we have today, and that is U.S. Senate candidate Diane Sayre, who is a LaRouche candidate in New York. She says, how should perfectly sovereign nations interact with each other? Can we eradicate poverty worldwide without violating sovereignty? Can we eradicate poverty worldwide without violating sovereignty? And so now, let's see, who went first last time? Let's see, was it, right? Wait, what's that? The communists went first last time? I'm sorry, I'm so out of it right now. So the libertarians had, but that doesn't make sense because they were the last ones to speak. Yeah. It's okay. So then is it the LaRouche movement now? Hold on. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I get lost trying to keep track of all the comments and stuff like that. It takes too much work. So hold on. Where is Cade? There he is. Okay, let me give you, and let's reduce the timing. I think you guys have been doing a great job, but I'm going to do 3 minutes so that we can get to like a couple more questions. And then is it okay with everyone? Give me a thumbs up if you think we can go until about 11:20. Is that okay, or a little bit around then? Okay, I won't try to stretch it too much longer because people were only expecting it to go to 11. So I'm sorry, I'm going to read it one more time and then we'll go to it. She says, how should perfectly sovereign nations interact with one another? Can we eradicate poverty worldwide without violating sovereignty? Here it goes.
Yeah, if you give me 1 minute, then you can close if you want, Chris. All right. And I think the question of sovereignty here is an important thing. I'm going to answer this at a bit of a tangent with the minute that I have. But I think in what we've been discussing today, getting a sense of what sovereignty is a helpful thing to try and establish a baseline. Because I think with what we've heard, we have this interaction between maybe the individual and the species, and it gets lost in abstraction a bit. Whether you're thinking of the people conglomerating into the will of the people and determining history, or if you're thinking of individual firms conglomerating to determine the supply and demand and forming the market. I think what gets lost there is the actual sovereignty of the thought of the individual human expressed in its capacity to develop beyond what the current state of things is. That capacity for sovereignty doesn't reduce down to a natural force of the market or of history, but is itself the greatest natural force. And when you have a community of nations that understands that view of man and establishes it as its central principle, the common good becomes the most natural thing to do. it becomes directly apparent how it is in every nation's interest for the poverty of the world to be eradicated through willful, collaborative infrastructure and development. And Chris, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I would just say that because we're all human, there absolutely this can be done. I mean, you look at what the Chinese are doing right now. They're not forcing governments to go with a certain system or to change. They're not demanding democracy or communism or anything. They're not demanding a system. They're simply building infrastructure and allowing nations to develop. And that's what the United States used to believe in. You know, this is what John Quincy Adams believed in, with a community of principle among sovereign nations. So we should go back to being that America again. And thankfully, the Chinese have picked up on that idea, and they are building infrastructure all over the world, and that's going to lift mankind out of poverty, and we should join with them in doing that.
Thank you very much for your answers. And now we'll hear from Mike and Jorge.
I'll go first real quick. Jorge can clean up for us as our heavy hitter. Indeed, the fastest, best, and probably only real lasting way to eradicate poverty is to move toward a Westphalian respect for national sovereignty worldwide, and at the same time, its mirror reflection on a domestic level inside each nation. Each government needs to adopt a pro-market attitude. Poverty in the 21st century is a distributional problem. It is a public policy problem. It is not something that occurs out of the institutionalization of democratic principles or of free market principles or out of freedom generally. The reason we have pockets of poverty around the world is because we don't have free markets operating in a way that are unfettered by their respective governments. Indeed, apologies to those who would rather not pay attention to reality. The Belt and Road Initiative is a big step backwards. It is a doubling down on 20th century technology that does not bode well for the partner nations with China. I worry very much about the fiscal irresponsibility of so much borrowing, so much debt going into investment in 20th century technology. And I worry what happens when we find out 20, 40 years from now that these investments didn't pay off. I worry about that very much. Jorge, you clean up for us.
Yeah, I mean, we just need more freedom. We need people to understand free markets. And for example, if the United States had a much easier immigration policy, if we had open borders, what is the easiest way for someone to end their poverty? If you are in a corrupt country, you can just come to the United States and suddenly you're working and you're making, maybe in Africa, you're in a poor country and you're making $5 a day. You just come to the United States and now you're working with technology, there's the rule of law, and suddenly your productivity has gone up by 10 times just by moving to a country that has better tools and so on. So just having more easier immigration would lift people out of poverty immediately. Another thing is just the countries should just have low taxes, and allow companies to invest in those countries. If a lot of poor African countries right now had real capitalism and low taxes, companies would go over there and rush to hire, the cheap labor over there. And by doing that, they would invest in all the technology and all the manufacturing plants and all the things that you need to increase the productivity of African labor. Because right now in Africa, there's very few manufacturing plants and the technology that can make people far more productive. If we want to end poverty is just a lack of wealth. So if we just increase wealth and our ability to create wealth, the competition between employers will ensure that wealth makes it to the people, and we will lift people out of poverty. So the quickest way to end all of this poverty is just to have more freedom, more real capitalism, not the mess we have now, with the United States printing trillions to fund all these wars and all these disasters.
Thank you very much, Jorge and Mike. Okay, and now let's hear from Caleb and Sam.
All right. So
Let me get my 3-minute timer real quick. I'm sorry.
Okay.
And go.
Okay.
Oop.
First thing is, there are times when I think that the free trade policy is better, for example, than sanctions, right? The free trade is a hell of a lot better than sanctions. Why aren't we buying any goods from Cuba or North Korea or any of these countries, to develop their economy? They've got, the land there. They could develop a higher population, all this. So I think there are a lot of times when trade is good. And there's a lot of times when taxes are bad, okay? Because I understand what taxes are. They're like a brake on capital, right? And you take that brake, well, sometimes you want to hit the brake, right? Because maybe there's an industry that's not so good for people, whatever. But a lot of things, they're highly productive. We don't want to tax them, right? It doesn't make sense to tax them, right? But let's talk about this global policy more than anything. So the thing is that when we make agreements with other countries, right? Right now, the way we do it is with the club. It's with the stick, right? We're like a gangster mafia. We tell them how to operate. It's not going to work, right? And that's the main thing. We're going to see if the BRI pans out. I have a feeling it's mostly going to pan out based on what I'm seeing. I think it's already working. We can see countries getting richer and richer from their BRI agreements already. So I think it is working. And one very important thing to avoid a American breakdown catastrophe is we need a currency off-ramp. Right now, US dollar is dominant in the world. There needs to be a new type of thing. And one type of way to do this is through fixed exchange agreements, which LaRouche actually proposed, which would enable countries to use currencies other than US dollar without losing access to American goods. And with that, I'm going to open it up to Caleb.
Sure. I just want to say that, when we talk about the global setup and relation between countries, when we talk about imperialism is not a policy, it's a system. And it's these big monopolies that are facilitated by the government. Amazon, Walmart, ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron. These are the ultra monopolies, and wars are part of maintaining their hegemony. Any country that breaks out of their global financial system, starts to try and build itself up and develop, becomes a target. War is about enforcing a dying global financial system that is about holding back economic development around the world. And that there is an alternative global economy centered around Russia and China. You've got Iran, you've got the Bolivarian countries of Latin America. There is a new economy emerging in the world. And that economy is largely based on growth, but small business owners are a big part of it. And the focus should be on the big monopolies and entering, it should be an alliance between the labor movement, between the anti-imperialist countries around the world and small business owners, et cetera, against the big monopolies, the imperialists, the corporations that are leading humanity off a cliff, basically, with their dying financial system and their willingness to defend that dying financial system with war.
Thank you both. Hold on, I almost turned off my own video. Okay. Thank you, everyone. That was a very enjoyable round of comments. So I said I was going to get to like one or two more. It's 11:13. I regret that I don't think that I can do that as such, but instead I will refer to this question that was posed by Lumbia Logic in her contribution, excuse me, and I would invite you to use it as an opportunity to make a closing statement. And let's make those closing statements also rather brief. If we could keep them to perhaps 4 minutes, I think that would. We're going to go past 11:20, but it will be concluding successfully, I hope. And the basic thing she asked is, how does this coalition? How do people? By which I think she refers to the Rage Against the War Machine groupings, all of the different sponsors, all of the people who were there. How is it that we can, advance this process and move to a greater degree of Well, I guess like to put it on the table, well, from my own editorial side, how can we actually succeed in preventing nuclear war and in creating the future that we want? So, and anyway, I invite you to answer however you like. It's your closing statement. Say what you like. And I guess I'll continue, or why don't I reverse the order that we had at the beginning, and we'll go communist, libertarian, LaRouche. I hope that that's acceptable to people. Okay, here we go. So.
Okay. Well, I'm going to make my closing statement here by actually kind of completely changing the subject and just saying that one of the main reasons that Americans and people in the United States think that we could never have a socialist system here is because they say that socialism is un-American. And that's a lie. Abraham Lincoln was a big ally of Karl Marx, and that the New York Tribune, which was the Republican Party newspaper of New York City, actually hired Karl Marx during the Civil War to write for it. August Willich, who was a brigadier general in the Union Army, was also a communist and a collaborator with Karl Marx. And Karl Marx worked very hard to support Abraham Lincoln to defeat slavery, and he called the Civil War the Second American Revolution. The Pledge of Allegiance was written by a socialist, a Baptist minister who was also a socialist named Francis Bellamy. He wrote a book, his cousin wrote a book called Looking Backward, which was one of the most popular science fiction novels telling of a future socialist America. Roosevelt, one of the most beloved presidents in American history, brought communists to sleep over at the White House. Gilbert Green of the Young Communist League was being called before Congress, and Roosevelt had him sleep over at the White House. He met with communist labor leaders at the White House many times. And Lincoln and Roosevelt are the two most beloved presidents in American history. And both of them were not afraid to align themselves with communists when it came to defeating the British Empire and the British financial system that is grinding the world into poverty. It was the Confederacy that was backed and aligned by the British. Lincoln aligned with communists to defeat it. Roosevelt, was very opposed to the oligarchical free trade system and the impoverishment it created that gave birth to the menace of fascism around the world. He was happy to align with the Soviet Union to defeat the Nazis. And this idea that somehow that we should have an economy that serves the people, where the banks and the major industries and the centers of economic power function to serve public good and not the profits of a wealthy few. The idea that somehow un-American is something that's been pumped into our heads by the military-industrial complex since the Cold War. Be scared of the Red Menace, be scared of the communists. But it's because of the communists that we had the labor movement in this country that got us good wages. A lot of times Trump talks about how those good-paying industrial jobs have gone away. Those good-paying industrial jobs, they didn't used to be good-paying. It wasn't until the 1930s when the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, a radical union led by communists, led the workers to occupy their factories and demand union contracts, that those good-paying jobs got to be good-paying jobs. The auto plants and the steel mills used to pay very low wages until the communists organized the workers there. It was communists who organized for civil rights before Martin Luther King Jr. did. It was communists who were involved in winning the right to vote for women, and that communists and Marxists have always been a part of the United States. We have been a very important part of U.S. culture, and that in China, they call their system socialism with Chinese characteristics. And as much as I think we should study and learn from different systems, the only type of socialism we're ever going to have in America will be a socialism with American characteristics. It'll be a unique form of socialism rooted in our American traditions, our American history, designed to address and resolve the problems facing the U.S. society at this time. I'm not interested in putting on a costume and pretending I'm in China or I'm a guerrilla fighter in Latin America. We need to study our own traditions, the movements of the abolitionists, the movements of the labor movement here, all the progressive struggles in this country that have stood up against injustice as we move to build a people's movement against the big bankers and monopolists that are trying to get us into World War III and grind the country into poverty. We need a people's movement to raise the country out of poverty and move toward a society where human labor is valued, because it's human labor that is the source of all wealth. Human beings are a source of value. Our leaders right now, they view the population as this annoying horde to be managed. Rather, we should view every person in this country, every child who's born, as having potential, having the ability to give something amazing, to make a great contribution, to make our country stronger and wealthier.
Thank you guys very much. And thank you so much for participating. I hope we get to do this again very soon. So I'm going to move on and give the floor to our friends Mike Dermott, presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, or seeking the nomination of the Libertarian Party, I should say. And we have Jorge Posada, co-founder of Liberty Speaks. Go right ahead, guys. I'll give you 4 minutes.
Thank you, Daniel. Caleb is right that Roosevelt and Lincoln were willing to work with communists when it was in their interest to defeat some foreign power. However, both Roosevelt and Lincoln were horrible when it came to understanding how their own economy worked and would be considered anti-economic forces by today's standards. Caleb is also right that it has been said many times that socialism is un-American, and I understand why he laments those words. But as lamentable as they may make one feel, it is unfortunately absolutely the truth. Socialism is anti-American. Socialism is a collectivism that depends on the government imposing a structure on the people. That's what socialism is, definitionally so. Americanism, on the other hand, is the idea that our government serves our interests and whose power is limited, indeed delimited, by a contract that we call the Constitution, that we use to delimit those powers, to limit our government to serving only our interests insofar as we define them as protecting our individual liberties. Even if I did not believe that free market capitalism were the only way to create the most efficient economy possible, and I do, not as a matter of philosophy, but as an economist who has studied economics here and abroad and for 40 years and professionally, even if I did not believe any of that, the simple truth would still be that our government does not have the ethical authority to make rules for us that would constitute any sort of what anyone might call socialism. And for this reason, socialism is indeed not just inefficient, but un-American.
All right, so I want to begin by saying, Caleb, I'm sorry, perhaps I took your words out of context, and I really appreciate your protest against the American anti-Chinese warmongering, right? I know you've done some great protests. We do not need any war with China. You know, I do believe that the Chinese bureaucrats are just, again, to me, economically ignorant, doing all kinds of bad things, but I think they mean well. We need to trade and interact with China instead of just vilifying them all the time, and I really appreciate your warmongering protest. And so I will say that Lincoln and Roosevelt were some of the worst American presidents. I mean, Lincoln led to the Civil War, and the United States should have never gotten involved in the Second World War. And it was Roosevelt's warmongering that allowed that thing to just like blow up. But that's another conversation. Now, I want to finish with a couple of quotes. So Friedrich Hayek says, "The argument for liberty is not an argument against organization, which is one of the most powerful tools human reason can employ, but an argument against all exclusive, privileged, monopolistic organization, against the use of coercion to prevent others from doing better." And I'll leave it at that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, both of you, for participating tonight. Great to meet you, Mike, and great to see you again, Jorge.
Good to see you, Daniel. Thanks.
Okay, pardon me. So, all right, and now we're going to hear from Chris and Cade, and they have 4 minutes. Excuse me. Go right ahead, please.
I could take another quick one.
Sure.
Then you want to finish it again? Yeah, and so in answering the question of where we can continue this coalition, I think responding to something that Mike said might be pertinent. And when talking about what ethical, let's say, to paraphrase it, the ethical mandate that a government would or would not have in applying its actions upon its citizenry or not, I think that there's actually some pertinent points in German poet Friedrich Schiller's Aesthetical Letters, where he's talking about what went wrong in the French Revolution. And a principal point within that is, for him, for a successful revolution, it involves the citizenry, through the force of its political will, conferring that ethical mandate to the government in a way that's not in a casting off of its sovereignty for the government to then impose an ideal upon it, but in the building up of its own individual moral capacity to the point where it harmonizes with the actions of the republic in order to get the best results of organization from any scale, from the individual to the global. And I think it's in a principle of harmony between the individual and the most species level look at humanity, where we can best develop a coalition that would directly address the necessities of the economic crisis that we're facing. And Chris, I'll jump.
Okay. Well, I would just say I would invite people to tune in to our conference that's coming up next weekend, where the discussion will be what's been talked about tonight, this principle of Westphalia. I mean, what was Westphalia? It was the idea that to end war, we had to think about the advantage of the other. That and the basis of that was massive economic development, canals, industry in Europe. So I think that's the idea. We've got to work with Russia, China, India as three major powers in a win-win cooperation. And the history of the United States is that from the American Revolution on, we worked. I mean, Russia was our ally in the American Revolution, our ally in the Civil War, our ally in defeating fascism in Europe. China, Sun Yat-sen was modeled his principles on Lincoln and the whole idea of railroads in China, internal developments, the Trans-Siberian Railroad model and the Transcontinental Railroad. These ideas of internal improvement and economic development to lift mankind up are truly American, the best of America. And that history has been stolen from people. A comic book view of history has been replaced, I think, and that's a terrible thing that we have to fix. But and the LaRouche organization is attempting to do that, to get at the real history of the United States and our cooperation with other nations. But I invite everybody to tune into the conference next week. Because I think the question of economic development right now to stop World War III, that's the fundamental thing that we have to focus on.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring everyone up on for one last goodbye. So everyone's on screen now, including Irene. Oops, there's my timer. And I just have to say, I think this was what turned out to be a rather rich conversation. I learned a lot that I didn't know people were thinking, and I thank everyone for participating, and I hope that we can have another one of these soon, hosted by another organization. So that's what I have to say. All right. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your audience. Thank you for the people who donated money. That's